Have you ever wondered why humans started creating religions in the first place? Not just why they follow them now, but why they were made at all. If we look at the earliest signs of organized belief, we start to see a pattern. Religion wasn't something that fell out of the sky. It was built step by step by people. And like everything built by people, it served a purpose. At the beginning, people didn't understand the world. The sun rose, then disappeared. Storms came out of nowhere. Crops failed. People got sick and died without warning. There were no tools to explain these things. So people created stories. Stories about powerful beings that controlled the sky, the land, the seasons. These stories gave them comfort. They made life less random. If lightning struck, maybe it wasn't chaos. Maybe it was punishment. Or maybe it was a sign. That idea made people feel less helpless. But something happened when these stories became more than just stories. People started using them, not just for comfort, but for control. Because if you say you understand the will of the gods, suddenly people listen. If you say you can speak to them, suddenly you're in charge. Religion became useful. It was no longer just a way to explain the unknown. It became a tool to organize power. Early tribal leaders, shamans, priests, they noticed this. The moment someone claimed they had special access to the divine, they gained influence. People gave them food, shelter, respect. This gave rise to entire classes of religious leaders who didn't farm, didn't hunt, didn't build. But they survived just as well, or even better, than the rest. The invention of gods created a new kind of social hierarchy. And the more complex society became, the more religion became necessary to hold it together. Before laws and police, fear of divine punishment worked just fine. If people believed a god was always watching, you didn't need to build jails. That was cheaper. That was easier. Religion became a kind of early surveillance system, self-imposed but highly effective. But fear alone isn't enough. People also needed hope. Life in the past was brutal. Disease, war, hunger, loss. Religion offered the idea that this life wasn't the only one. If your child died, maybe they went to a better place. If you were poor and hungry, maybe paradise awaited. That gave people strength. Not because it was true, but because they wanted it to be. And in hard times, wanting something to be true is often enough. Religions also created unity. Shared beliefs gave people a sense of identity. It helped divide us from them. That's powerful in a world where survival often depends on who's in your group. If everyone around you believes in the same sacred symbols, you trust them more. You fight alongside them. You build with them. Religion wasn't just a belief system. It was an early form of social glue. But this glue had a cost, because when you build unity by excluding others, violence is never far behind. Once people believed their God was the only real God, the people who believed in different gods became a threat. And it wasn't long before those people were seen as enemies. Religious difference became a reason to conquer, to kill, to erase. So, the very thing that brought people together also tore others apart. Another reason religions spread so easily is because they offer certainty. Human beings struggle with uncertainty. We want answers, but real answers take time, evidence, and effort. Religion skips all of that. It offers simple explanations for complex problems. Why are we here? Because a God made us. Why do bad things happen? Because of sin. What happens when we die? Heaven or hell? That kind of clarity is tempting. Even if it's wrong, it feels good. Religions also evolved to protect themselves. The more complex they became, the more rules they added. Rules about who could question, what could be doubted, what could be said. Dissent became dangerous. Doubt was punished. Because once people stop believing, the whole structure starts to shake. So religions developed defense systems, taboos, heresy laws, threats of eternal punishment. They didn't just offer belief, they demanded loyalty. And as literacy spread, so did the need to freeze religious ideas into fixed texts. Before that, stories changed, but once written down, they became unchangeable. That created a strange situation. Texts written in ancient times were treated as if they were perfect forever. Even if they reflected outdated knowledge, tribal customs, or old moral codes, people clung to them. And because questioning them was forbidden, bad ideas lasted far longer than they should have. Many religions also absorbed useful ideas from the cultures they conquered. They took over festivals, symbols, and rituals. This made them easier to adopt. People didn't have to abandon everything, they just had to reinterpret it. In this way, religions became adaptive. Like viruses, they mutated to survive. One interesting thing is how similar many religions are. Despite being from different parts of the world, they repeat the same themes: a great flood, a chosen people, a dying and rising God, a sacred book, a final judgment. These aren't coincidences. These ideas speak to shared human fears and hopes. But instead of seeing this as evidence of truth, it makes more sense to see it as evidence of human psychology. And in many cases, religion became a mirror of the power structures around it. In societies ruled by kings, gods were often seen as kings too. In societies built on conquest, gods were warriors. In deeply unequal societies, religion told people that inequality was part of the divine plan, that the rich were blessed, the poor were tested. That kind of belief kept people in their place. When colonial powers took over new territories, they often used religion as a tool. Missionaries came first, soldiers came later. Religion softened resistance. It rebranded conquest as salvation. It told people to trade their old beliefs for new ones, while often taking their land, their language, their freedom. The spread of religion was rarely peaceful. It rode on the back of empires. But none of this means that religion was always created with bad intent. Sometimes people genuinely believed they were helping others, that their vision of the divine was true and should be shared. But good intentions don't erase the outcomes. Many harmful systems began with sincere beliefs. Another reason religions were created was to give people a sense of cosmic importance. In a vast, indifferent universe, people wanted to feel special. Religion told them they were chosen, or made in a God's image, or watched over by unseen forces. It shrank the universe down to human scale. It made people feel like the center of everything. But this idea also made it harder to accept the truth when science showed just how small and random human life can be. And still, many people held on, because religion didn't just offer meaning. It offered community, ritual, structure. It told people how to live, who to marry, what to eat, when to pray. That can be comforting, but it can also be limiting, because when rules are rigid, they often punish those who don't fit. Women, outsiders, thinkers, people who love differently. They often found themselves outside the circle. One pattern that keeps repeating throughout history is how religions reflect the fears of the people who create them. When disease spread, people believed it was divine punishment. When natural disasters struck, they blamed human sin. Religion provided answers that protected people from uncertainty, but often steered them away from real solutions. Instead of studying germs, they sacrificed animals. Instead of preparing for earthquakes, they built shrines. The belief in divine anger slowed down the search for real knowledge. Religions also played a major role in shaping gender roles. In many early societies, women had strong positions in community life. But as religions became institutionalized, the dominant figures were almost always men. Texts were written by men, interpreted by men, and used to give men authority over women. Rules about dress, speech, family, sexuality. Most were designed to limit the freedom of women. These weren't cosmic truths. They were social preferences, codified and then stamped with divine approval. Even the idea of sin had a function. It wasn't just about behavior, it was about guilt. If people could be convinced that they were born broken or always falling short, they became easier to manage. Guilt made people look to religious leaders for forgiveness. It created dependency. And it gave those in power something they could always sell: absolution. Another function of religion was to provide narratives about death. The fear of death has always haunted humanity. Religion gave people ways to cope by offering afterlives, reincarnation, or transcendence. But these ideas didn't come from evidence. They came from desire, from not wanting death to be the end. Religion gave people comfort not by showing them truth, but by shielding them from it. And in doing that, it created another problem. If this life is just a test or a stepping stone to something better, then suffering starts to look acceptable. In some belief systems, pain is noble, poverty is spiritual. Questioning injustice becomes dangerous. Because if everything happens according to a divine plan, then trying to change the world can be seen as fighting against that plan. Religion, in this way, often ended up protecting the status quo. Religions were also used to legitimize violence. When leaders wanted to conquer, enslave, or eliminate others, They often claimed it was what their God wanted. Holy wars, inquisitions, forced conversions. These weren't just political decisions. They were framed as sacred duties. When violence is wrapped in the language of faith, it becomes harder to question. It becomes holy. But religion didn't just create wars. It created rituals. And those rituals had deep psychological effects. Repetition creates belief. Singing the same songs, reciting the same prayers, following the same rules, it reinforces identity. It trains the brain to associate those practices with comfort, belonging, safety. The content of the rituals often doesn't matter as much as their familiarity. People grew up with them. They became part of who they were, and that made them hard to leave behind. That's another reason religions lasted so long. They didn't just shape belief, they shaped identity. If you were born into a religion, it shaped how you saw the world, how your parents treated you, how your community treated you. Leaving it could mean losing your family, losing your friends, losing the only framework you ever knew. That emotional cost made it difficult to question, even when the logic no longer made sense. And those who did question were often punished. Throughout history, doubters and skeptics were silenced, sometimes violently, sometimes socially. The fear of doubt was baked into the system, because doubt is contagious, and once a few people start to question, others might follow. Religion protected itself by making doubt a sin. Even in more peaceful forms, religions were structured in ways that protected their power. Sacred texts were kept in languages most people couldn't read. Interpretations were controlled by elites. Access to divine knowledge was limited to those in special positions. This created dependence. Ordinary people had to go through intermediaries to access what they were told was ultimate truth. That kind of structure discouraged independent thinking. In some cultures, people were taught that even their thoughts could be sinful, that even doubt in their own minds could be dangerous. This created a system where people policed themselves, not just their actions, but their internal world. And that's one of the most powerful forms of control. Over time, as science advanced, some religious claims were challenged directly. The Earth was not the center of the universe. Species evolved over time. Diseases were not caused by demons. Natural disasters were not punishments. But instead of adjusting their views, many religions resisted these discoveries because they threatened the structure, the same structure that had served power for so long. Still, even as evidence piled up, many religions found ways to adapt. They reinterpreted their texts. They softened their rules. They tried to keep up just enough to stay relevant, but the core function remained the same: provide certainty, offer comfort, and maintain influence. And yet, the creation of religion wasn't all manipulation. In many ways, it was a reflection of early human needs: the need to belong, the need to understand, the need to feel safe. But once those needs became institutions, they hardened, they stopped evolving, and they began to resist the very curiosity that had inspired them in the first place. It's also worth noticing that religions often grow fastest during moments of crisis. When societies collapse, when people lose control, when there's widespread fear, religion spreads, because people look for structure in chaos. And religion offers ready-made answers. That's why it's so resilient. It's not built on truth. It's built on human emotion. And emotions don't go away just because something isn't real. In some cases, religion offered people a way to resist oppression. In places where political power was brutal, religious stories offered hope. They gave people dignity when society stripped it away. But the problem is, the same tool used to resist power can also become the tool of power once it's institutionalized. Revolutions become regimes. Prophets become popes. Freedom becomes law. And even now, many people are taught that without religion, life has no meaning, that without God, morality collapses. But that idea was created by religions to protect themselves. They taught people that they were the only path to goodness, to truth, to purpose. And when people believed that, they stopped looking for other ways, even when those ways might be better. One of the clever ways religions protected themselves was by creating consequences for disbelief that went far beyond social rejection. Eternal torment, rebirth as something low, disconnection from the divine. These ideas made leaving a religion feel dangerous, not just in this life, but forever. That kind of fear can keep generations locked into belief, even when they no longer understand why. It's not that all religious people are dishonest. Many are sincere, but sincerity doesn't equal accuracy. people can be deeply convinced of things that aren't true, especially when they've been raised to never question them. And that's what many religions depend on: early conditioning. Start young, teach before critical thinking develops, and reinforce the message constantly. By the time a child becomes an adult, belief feels like part of their identity, and questioning it feels like tearing themselves apart. Religion was also used to explain personal struggles. Misfortune wasn't just bad luck. It was a test, a lesson, a sign. That made people less likely to challenge their situation. A poor person might believe they were meant to suffer. A sick person might believe it was a spiritual test. These ideas encourage passivity. They made people blame themselves or fate instead of changing their circumstances. It made injustice more bearable, which made injustice easier to maintain. And when religious leaders did offer help, it often came with conditions: obedience, conformity, donations. In many cases, help wasn't free, it was transactional. Do this, believe this, follow this, and maybe you'll be blessed. Maybe not in this life, but later. It's a powerful sales pitch because it can't be proven wrong. If things go well, it's a blessing. If they go badly, it's a test. Either way, the system defends itself. Another reason religion stuck was because it was baked into everything: art, law, marriage, politics. Religion shaped the foundation of societies. Even today, in supposedly secular countries, you can see its influence in symbols, language, holidays, customs. It's not just about belief, it's about heritage, culture, identity, which makes it harder to step away. People don't want to feel like they're betraying their roots, even if they no longer believe the stories those roots are based on. Religion also offered roles. People could become saints, monks, martyrs, prophets. That gave them purpose in societies where opportunities were limited. A poor man could rise by becoming a preacher. A woman could be revered if she gave herself to the church. These roles gave people status and meaning, not because they discovered truth, but because they played the game well. It's also important to realize how religions created entire economies: temples, tithes, donations, pilgrimages, relics, land ownership. Religious institutions became wealthy and powerful. In many periods of history, religious bodies were the largest landowners. They collected wealth tax-free. They controlled trade routes. They influenced kings. They weren't just spiritual, they were political and economic machines. And when science began offering better explanations, religion didn't fade easily. It attacked science, it banned books, it punished thinkers. Galileo was threatened with torture. Others were exiled, burned, silenced. This wasn't about faith, it was about control. Religion feared being replaced. And science, with its slow, methodical search for truth, was a threat. Because science didn't care about tradition, it cared about evidence. That's dangerous to any system built on authority. Yet, despite all this, many people today still believe. Not always because they've been forced, sometimes because belief gives them comfort. And that's understandable. Life is difficult. People want meaning. But comfort and truth aren't always the same. A soft pillow might help you sleep. That doesn't mean it explains the stars. And even now, religion adapts. It uses technology. It rebrands itself as spiritual, but not religious. It adopts modern language, but the core remains the same: control belief, shape identity, discourage doubt. That's why it still survives. Not because it's right, but because it's evolved to fit into whatever society needs it to be. Some people say religion gave us morality, but if you look closer, morality often came from human experience, not divine command. Ideas like fairness, kindness, empathy, they can be found in societies with very different beliefs. In fact, many moral breakthroughs happened in spite of religion, not because of it. The abolition of slavery, the advancement of women's rights, the recognition of same-sex relationships, these movements were often opposed by religious institutions, not led by them. And yet, many still believe that without religion, everything would fall apart, that without belief in God, people would have no reason to be good. But that's an idea religion itself created. It's part of its self-defense. Make people believe that letting go of faith means letting go of everything good. That way, people stay in line, not out of truth, but out of fear. The truth is, religions were created because people needed answers when there were none. They were created to explain nature, to manage fear, to structure power, to justify rules, to bind communities, to protect hierarchies. They were built not by gods, but by humans. They were shaped not by the stars, but by struggle, confusion, and the desire for meaning. And once created, they took on a life of their own. They spread, evolved, fought, split, merged. They developed rituals, doctrines, myths. They were protected by empires, guarded by fear, and passed down by generations who often didn't know where they came from, but still believed they were sacred. But the fact that religions were created doesn't mean we need to keep them. What once served a purpose might no longer serve us today. The world has changed. We have better tools to understand it. We no longer need to invent stories about invisible beings to make sense of the sky. We no longer need to believe suffering is sacred in order to cope with loss. We can face reality without dressing it up. Letting go of religion doesn't mean losing meaning. It means finding meaning in things that are real, in kindness without fear, in purpose without myth, in knowledge that's earned, not handed down, in life, not the afterlife. The stories people created long ago were shaped by the limits of their understanding. They weren't foolish, they were trying. But today, we know more. And the question isn't whether those stories once had value. The question is whether we still need to live by them now. Maybe the most human thing is not just to create stories, but to outgrow them when they no longer fit. Thanks for listening. If you found this thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more content like this. Let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to hear your thoughts.